Indonesia. But first, I'd like to address Russia's missile attacks on Ukraine this week. On the very day that I and others confronted the Russian foreign minister across the G20 summit table with the brutality of his country's actions. On the very day that President Zelensky addressed the G20 with a plan to stop the war, Russia launched over 80 separate missile strikes on Ukraine. The targets were innocent people and civilian infrastructure. The aim, to cast the population into darkness and cold. Once again, Russia has shown its barbarity and given the lie to any claim that they are interested in peace. During the bombardment of Ukraine on Tuesday, an explosion took place in eastern Poland. The investigation into this incident is ongoing, and it has our full support. As we have heard the Polish and American presidents say, it is possible that the explosion was caused by Ukrainian munition, which was deployed in self-defense. And whether or not this proves to be the case, no blame can be placed on a country trying to defend itself against such a barrage. The blame belongs solely to Russia. I spoke to President Duda yesterday to express my sympathy and pledge our solidarity. I also spoke to President Zelensky on a joint call with Prime Minister Trudeau to express our continued support. And I met my G7 and NATO counterparts at the sidelines of the G20. We will help our Polish allies to conclude their investigation, and we will continue to stand with Ukraine in the face of Russia's criminal aggression. Mr. Speaker, the Bali summit took place amidst the worst global economic crisis since 2008. The G20 was created to grip challenges like this, but today's crisis is different because it is being driven by a G20 member. By turning off the gas taps and choking off the Ukrainian grain supply, Russia has severely disrupted global food and energy markets. The economic shockwaves will ripple around the world for years to come. So together with other responsible members of the G20, we are delivering a decisive response. Almost all G20 members called out Russia's actions, declaring that today's era must not be one of war. We will work together to uphold international law and the United Nations Charter, and we will act to protect our collective economic security. The G20 agreed to use all available tools to support the global economy and ensure financial stability. That means international financial institutions mobilizing more resources to support developing countries. It means continuing to call out those who exploit their lending power to create debt traps for emerging economies. And it means tackling the causes of rising inflation head-on, including by delivering fiscal sustainability. We pledged our support for the UN-brokered deal to keep grain shipments moving in the Black Sea. That deal, I'm pleased to say, has now been renewed. 2/3 of Ukraine's wheat goes to developing countries. With famine looming, it is desperately needed, and Russia must uphold its part of this deal. We agreed action to improve energy security by accelerating the transition to clean energy, and we launched a new Just Energy Transition Partnership with Indonesia, which will unlock billions in private finance for new green energy infrastructure. And finally, we committed to maintain free markets, free trade, and to reform the World Trade Organization. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I held my first meeting with President Biden. We pledged to redouble our support for Ukraine and to continue deepening our cooperation, including on energy security and managing the challenges posed by China. I met Prime Minister Modi, where we reviewed progress on our forthcoming FTA. I discussed our extension to the CPTPP with the Prime Ministers of Japan, Canada, and Australia, and I met with almost every other leader at the summit, with the exception of Russia. In each of these discussions, there was a shared determination to restore stability, deliver long-term growth, and drive a better future. One where no single country has the power to hold us back. In just a few moments, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will build on these international foundations when he sets out the autumn statement, putting our economy back onto a positive trajectory and restoring our fiscal sustainability. Mr. Speaker, by being strong abroad, we strengthen our resilience at home. So we will continue to support Ukraine. We will continue to stand up for the rule of law and the fundamental principles of sovereignty and self-determination. And we will build a global economy that is more secure, more stable and more resilient. Because this is what the gravity of the moment demands. And this is how we will ensure that our country emerges from this crisis stronger than it was before. And I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. What should have been a summit focused on global economic recovery and delivering clear commitments on climate change was sadly overshadowed by the unjustifiable actions of Russia and their illegal war in Ukraine. Civilian infrastructure targeted across Ukraine and a war of aggression rumbling on as world leaders tried to reach agreement. Whatever the outcome of the investigation into the missile incident in Poland, it is a stark reminder of the danger Russia's unjustifiable war has brought to the border of our NATO allies. We must remain vigilant and united in our opposition to this pointless and brutal conflict. And as I've said many times from this dispatch box, and to the Prime Minister personally, whatever other differences we may have across this House, and there are many, when it comes to the defence of Ukraine, we stand as one. And on behalf of members on this side of the House, well, across the House, I want to send condolences to those killed in Poland. Poland's measured reaction to the incident and the calm heads that have prevailed over the past 2 days is welcome. I listened carefully to what the Prime Minister said about this and agree with him that no country can be blamed for defending itself. We do need to get to the bottom of this, and obviously the investigation is ongoing, but can I ask the Prime Minister when he expects those investigations to be finalised? Russia is losing this war, so I welcome the G20's communiqué, which set out that most members strongly condemn the war in Ukraine. And I ask the Prime Minister, has further support for Ukraine been discussed amongst Western allies? And what efforts are taking place to open a diplomatic roadmap to rid Ukraine of Russian troops and bring an end to the conflict? It is crucial we work to find international unity to further isolate Putin. That will include working with China. We do not underestimate the challenges China poses to global security. And we must defend the human rights of the Uyghur and democracy in Hong Kong. But our approach must be measured, and it is in our interest to work with China on the climate crisis, trade, and most importantly, isolating Putin. I was glad to see constructive dialogue on these issues between President Biden and President Xi. And I'd like to ask the Prime Minister if he believes this summit marks a change in Western-China relations, and whether his government is now taking a different approach from his predecessor to British-China relations. Mr. Speaker, after a decade of low growth in this country, it's crucial we open new trade opportunities. Prime Minister has said he met Prime Minister Modi, where a future UK-India trade deal was discussed. This deal has previously been put in doubt by his Home Secretary, indicating she would not support it. Labour does support a trade deal with India. We believe this can bring new opportunities to promote and create new jobs here in Britain. So can he tell us when he now expects this deal to be completed, and if measures on visas will be included in the overall deal? And if so, can he guarantee his whole cabinet will actually support it? Can he also tell us whether in his meeting with President Biden the UK-US trade deal was discussed? Or can we assume that this deal now has no prospect of being delivered any time soon? Lastly, Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister whether the Northern Ireland Protocol was raised by either US or EU colleagues? Failure to make progress is hurting British research, development and trade, all at a time when we need to remove barriers for British business. Fixing this issue could lead to a better relationship with our biggest trading partners, an opportunity for our scientists and our exporters, an end to the past 2 years of unnecessary fights and division. So when is he going to deliver? Mr. Speaker, our international alliances have never been so crucial for global stability and our own stability. We on this side of the House know that standing up to Russia's aggression will require further sacrifice. But we must make those sacrifices because taking no action is not an option. The message from all of us must be clear. Ukraine will win and Putin will lose. Democracy and liberty will defeat imperialism again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I start by thanking the right honourable gentleman for his words about the situation in Ukraine and Russia, and for his condemnation of the Russian aggression and steadfast support for the government and indeed this whole House's position on Ukraine. He's right to ask about the further support that we'll be providing. He'll know that we have provided £1.5 billion in economic and humanitarian support to Ukraine, alongside obviously the military assistance. We are hosting a reconstruction conference in the UK next year, and there's an ongoing dialogue about what further support that the Ukrainian government needs from us and others. In the short term, we are in the process of providing 25,000 pieces of winter equipment for the brave Ukrainian soldiers, but also funding to help restore some of the damage done to their energy infrastructure, which I know has been warmly welcomed by President Zelensky. Just to briefly turn to some of his other questions, on China, I very much supported President Biden in his meeting with President Xi. The President and I discussed that meeting at length. I believe that our approach to China is aligned entirely with that of the US and indeed our other allies like Canada and Australia. Of course, China poses significant challenges to our values, our interests, and indeed our economic security. It's right that we take the steps necessary to defend ourselves against them, but it is also right to engage in dialogue where that can make a difference on solving some of the pressing global challenges that we all collectively face. He asked about Northern Ireland. I have discussed this issue with both my European counterparts and indeed the President in various meetings, not just at the G20. I remain committed to finding a solution to the challenges posed by the protocol. It is clearly having an impact on families and businesses on the ground in Northern Ireland. The people of Northern Ireland deserve to have a functioning executive, particularly at a time like this, and it's something that I will devote my energies to bringing about. And I've had so far very constructive relationships with both the President and our European counterparts, including the Taoiseach last week on this particular issue. On trade, I think the broad overarching comment I would make to him is, when it comes to trade deals, whoever they may be with, what I won't do is sacrifice quality for speed. I think it is important. I think it is important that we take the time. It is important that we take the time to get trade deals right. Of course, this government believes wholeheartedly in the power and the benefits of free trade. It's something that we will champion around the world. With regard, I did discuss the free trade agreement with India, and both the Prime Minister and I committed our teams to working as quickly as we can to see if we can bring a successful conclusion to those negotiations. With regard to the US, their priorities are in lots of different areas, but with regard to trade, what we are doing, and the President and I discussed this, we are deepening our economic relationship. The United States is already our single largest trading partner. We're doing more with individual states to broaden our trade relationships, and we've seen recent action on tariffs with regard to steel, aluminium and agricultural exports, all of which is good for the UK economy. And of course, we are in the process of some exciting conversations about joining CPTPP. That is real evidence of our country's commitment to the Indo-Pacific region. Is something that is supported by the Prime Ministers of Canada, Australia and Japan, and hopefully we can bring those negotiations to conclusion in the near future. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, I just say that my reflections on the summit and indeed on attending COP are that the United Kingdom is at its best when we are an engaged and active member of the global community, where we are standing up for our values, where we are defending our interests, but also also spreading prosperity and alleviating poverty and suffering. I'm pleased to have had conversations with so many leaders over the past couple of days. It confirms to me that they very much welcome the UK's support in achieving all of those objectives, and that's what this government will set about doing.
Chair of the Select Committee, Alicia Kurtz.
Dialogue is never weakness. So will my right honourable friend tell us when he intends to reschedule his meeting with Xi Jinping? Because this is not an endorsement of the Chinese Communist Party, but an opportunity to set forward our red lines, particularly on the hostile actions we've seen on UK soil in the last month. But we do also need to see shortly a strategy from the Prime Minister on China. Will he also inform the House what progress is made at the G20 on isolating Russia, with India and other nations who are not as aligned with us on Ukraine, because they are key to global stability and also to ending bloodshed?
Well, I thank the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee for her excellent question. She's absolutely right about the importance of dialogue. She would have heard what I said to the Leader of the Opposition. We are in the process of refreshing our integrated review, and no doubt our approach to China will be a part of that. But in the meantime, she's right that dialogue also offers the opportunity for us to raise issues of concern, defending our values and interests, particularly with regard to areas like Hong Kong, which we will continue to do as the opportunity arises. She's also right to point out the position of those non-aligned countries. I think we should all take enormous comfort from the fact that the G20 communique was actually agreed. It was substantive, comprehensive, and contained strong language of condemnation about Russia's aggression. That was by no means assured just a week or so ago, and I think speaks to the feeling in the international community, something that I saw across the G20 table as many, if not all, almost all countries took the opportunity to say something about Russia's actions and join us in condemning it. But there is always work to do, and we will continue to have that dialogue with those partners.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and let me thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. Mr Speaker, with the Russian military continuing to fire deadly missiles at civilians right across Ukraine, I sincerely hope that Putin's foreign minister was made to feel the justified anger and disgust by those attending the G20. And with that in mind, can I begin by asking the Prime Minister what progress has been made at these summits to further isolate Putin's regime on the international stage? The whole world must stand together on Russian sanctions, and we must make sure that those responsible for crimes against humanity face justice. And what progress has been made to ensure there is no weakening in the international resolve to stand with Ukraine until the victory for their people? Mr Speaker, in terms of G20 discussions on the economy, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor keep referring to the global factors to blame for the financial crisis facing families across these islands. It's the excuse that they are using to impose austerity 2.0 in today's financial statement. But if this is really all to do with global factors, can the Prime Minister explain why the UK is the only G7 economy that is smaller today than it was before the pandemic? Why is the UK the only G7 country enacting austerity 2.0? The reality is this is a political choice. And finally, on the proposed Indo-Pacific trade deal, the latest Brexit fire sale that threatens to sell out our farmers and crofters. Not only this evidence continues to mount that the Brexit effect to reduce our economy by 4%, a factor that is driving Tory austerity. Just week we heard from the former DEFRA Secretary who retrospectively ripped apart the trade deal with Australia and the damaging impact it will have on our agri-food sector. A deal, I would remind the opposite benches, endorsed by every single Conservative MP. So can the Prime Minister explain to Scotland's food and farming industries why he is so committed to pursuing yet another Brexit deal which will deliver a hammer blow to their businesses?
Mr Speaker, I welcome the honourable gentleman's comments about Russia and Ukraine. Thank him for those. He should be reassured that the Russian Foreign Minister felt, I think, the full assault of allies, including the United Kingdom, in Putin's absence, of the absolute outrage that the international community feels what is happening, and that will continue to do so when Russia attend these fora. With regard to farming, look, this government is an absolute champion of British farming and farmers. Will remain the case. and it will continue. And it will continue to find opportunities to put great British produce on the tables of many more families around the world. And that's what we will continue to do. I'll just briefly address his comments on the economy, because I just point out, I mean, he had a few different stats. It's worth bearing in mind that we've just come from a G20 summit where 2/3 of those G20 members sitting around that table are experiencing inflation rates north of 7%. The IMF predicts that 1/3 of the world's economy is already or will shortly be in recession. And if he took the time to read the G20 communique, he will see that actually the global picture is very clear. Countries around the world are grappling with high energy prices, high food prices, and rising interest rates. And indeed, many countries around the world, like us, have committed, as does the international community, to ensuring fiscal sustainability as a path to improving those. That is absolutely the challenge that we confront. It's absolutely the challenge that the Chancellor will meet head on, and we will make those decisions with fairness and with compassion.
So this Defence Select Committee to myself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I strongly welcome the Prime Minister's words at the G20 in condemning Russia's aggression in Ukraine. I've just returned from Odessa with the Defence Select Committee, where there is huge appreciation for the British efforts in supporting Ukraine at this time. But just 1/5 of those grain ships are able to get out compared with prior to the war. And with Russia's maritime force severely diminished, Odessa is calling out for a new, more efficient grain deal. Would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me to look at securing a UN General Assembly resolution bypassing the Security Council, which would grant Odessa humanitarian safe haven status and the formation of a UN-led maritime force so those vital grain ships can be escorted safely out of Odessa?
Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight the importance of the grain shipments through Odessa. I'm very pleased that after concerted effort on our part and other allies with the United Nations Secretary-General, the grain deal has indeed been extended, which was in some doubt just days ago. I think that demonstrates the pressure that was put on Russia by the international community. He knows the importance of the free flow of both food and fertilisers to the developing world through those ships. I'd be delighted to meet with him to see what more we could do, but I think for now we should be very pleased that the grain deal is being extended. It's already seeing a decline in wheat prices, and that will bring some alleviation to the food inflation that we're seeing, particularly in the African continent.
Chris Brown.
Mr. Speaker, Putin's aggression was allowed to prosper for too long, ever since 2008, you could argue, so I completely support what the Prime Minister has said and done in supporting Ukraine against the barbarism of the Russian Federation. But just on China, can I ask him, I understand the realpolitik of this last week, but the concentration camps in the Xinjiang province continue, as does the genocide, and the suppression of human rights in Hong Kong continues. So can I just ask him to do one thing which the United States of America has already done, which is sanction Carrie Lam?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased that the United Kingdom has led efforts to hold China to account, including imposing sanctions on senior Chinese officials and mobilising international support to hold China to account at the United Nations. And as we heard previously, we will use dialogue as an opportunity to raise the concerns we have on Xinjiang and other human rights abuses as we see them.
John Barron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend the Prime Minister for the leadership this country is providing across a range of issues, including Russia. As to our ascension to the CPTPP, does he share my enthusiasm and optimism, given that this is a trading bloc that represents nearly 15% of the world's GDP, and it offers so many opportunities for so many export industries, including the Scotch industry, which tariffs would fall from 100% in many cases to 0. I'm sure that is something even the SNP could raise a glass to when we join.
My honourable friend puts it very, very well. And he's right about the importance of CPTPP. Not only the very significant economic benefits that he mentions, but also the strategic benefits about the United Kingdom being an engaged member of the Indo-Pacific community. As I said, I discussed with the Prime Ministers of Australia, Japan and Canada. There's incredible excitement about us joining, and we'll continue to conclude those negotiations as quickly as possible.
Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that the last G20 agreed to on-lend $100 billion of IMF special drawing rights to help tackle the crisis of food fragility and climate finance in the Global South. To date, we have only agreed to share much less of our entitlement than both France and China. The crisis is now. Will the Prime Minister look again at how we can increase our on-lending to this multilateral effort, not least to make good for the appalling decision to slash our aid budget?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I was pleased as Chancellor to actually usher through the special drawing rights allocation at the IMF, which is providing enormous relief to countries around the world. I met with the Managing Director of the IMF to discuss how we can do more. But remember, the SDR allocation is just one part of our effort to support people around the world. Also recently pleased to announce a £1 billion commitment to the Global Fund, something that was warmly welcomed, especially by countries in Africa.
Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
The Prime Minister to be congratulated on such successful talks with so many leaders around the world, in particular with President Modi. Could he update the House on other matters other than trade he discussed? For example, the granting of visas for highly skilled people to fill those needs in this country, possibly on environment, but above all on the issue raised by the Foreign Affairs Committee, India's stance to supporting Ukraine as the world's biggest democracy.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Our relationship and partnership with India goes so much more broadly than just a trading relationship. Actually, I was pleased to discuss increasing our security cooperation with India, work that began before my tenure, but we're keen to carry on. And also we made an announcement on a mobility scheme for young people, both from India to come here and for Brits to go there. It's a sign of what is possible, and I think those types of exchanges are both positive for countries involved and for the young people who will benefit from them.
Tamanjit Singh Dassi.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, at the G20, the Prime Minister agreed with his Indian counterpart to allow an additional 3,000 Indians into the UK every year, which inevitably, in the fullness of time, will lead to an increase in immigration. But at the same time, the Home Secretary has been busy spouting anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, dog whistle rhetoric, including incendiary remarks against international Indian students, which so incensed people within India. So who exactly is in charge of immigration policy? Is it the Prime Minister or the wannabe Prime Minister?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm disappointed with the honourable gentleman's comments, because I know he doesn't believe that. I think he can actually take comfort from the announcement that we just made, which is good also for Indian students as well as it is for British students to be able to go back and forth. That is a good thing. And what the Home Secretary is rightly focused on, and nothing dog whistle about it, is clamping down on illegal migration. That's something that the British people rightly expect and demand, and it's something that the Home Secretary and this government will deliver.
Michael Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition said correctly, Russia is losing this war. And like a wounded animal, it is lashing out, using weapons now, we believe, from Iran and also from North Korea. Was any consideration given to additional sanctions on those two countries, and also possibly excluding Russia from membership of the G20?
I say to my honourable friend, the G20 is not like the G7. It's a broader grouping of countries that works by consensus, so it is not possible to expel Russia in the same way. But what he will take comfort from is that we use the opportunity to unequivocally condemn Russia's actions. With regard to sanctions on Iran and others, he will know or may be aware that we have recently imposed new sanctions on Iran, but related specifically to their treatment of protesters in the recent demonstrations. It's the right thing to do. The behaviour of the Iranian regime is not acceptable, and we should hold them to account for it.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Facing the worst drought in 40 years, tens of millions of people in East Africa are going hungry. Children are dying today of malnutrition, and the United Nations expects a famine to be declared before the end of the year. While recognising the humanitarian aid that the UK has already given, does the Prime Minister recognise that the international community now needs to do more to save lives and not wait for that formal declaration of famine.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK is already tackling this issue head-on. At UNGA, we announced funding in particular for famine support in Somalia, and our work on helping to secure an extension to the Black Sea Grain Initiative will make an enormous difference to the people that he rightly cares about, as do I. But I'd also let him know that countries in Africa were very pleased by our commitment to the Global Fund, because they know that will also help alleviate some of the difficulties that they're facing.
Siobhan Bailey.
Deputy Speaker, multinationalism has never been more important given current global pressures and threats, not least in protecting the people of Ukraine. But despite Twitter mainly having a meltdown over flowery shirts, as this was his first G20 as Prime Minister, can my right honourable friend tell us how useful he found the meeting for relationship building and consolidating joint international working?
Well, I could say to my honourable friend, of course these summits are helpful in coordinating global action on tackling challenges like inflation or indeed supporting Ukraine. But it's also helpful in building those relationships with foreign leaders that can deliver tangible benefit for people here at home. Most recently, we've seen that given the dialogue we are now having with President Macron, the French, that's led to a new deal to help us tackle illegal migration. That's an example of why these dialogues and summits matter, but it's delivering real change for people here at home.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And further to his replies about our relationship with India, why are Britons alone in Europe currently excluded from the Indian e-visa scheme, which is doing more damage to our hard-pressed travel and tourism sector and extreme inconvenience for British families who want to visit relatives in India in the months to come? Did his discussions with Prime Minister Modi give him any hope that this ban might be lifted any time soon?
I can tell my honourable friend it is something that we discussed and raised. Of course, I would like to see the United Kingdom included on the e-visa scheme, and he can rest assured that we'll continue to raise it with our Indian counterparts.
Shaleshwara.
Speaker, would my right honourable friend confirm that in his conversations with President Biden of the US and his counterparts in the EU, he has made it absolutely clear the UK's intention to preserve the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement? And would he also confirm that in so doing, it is not unreasonable for the UK, an independent and sovereign nation, to be able to maintain its own economic integrity?
I can give my right honourable friend that assurance. Of course, the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom is important and must be preserved, and that is under some stress, as we have seen in Northern Ireland, that he knows very well from his previous role. And he has my commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, something that I discussed not only with our European counterparts, but also the President. We remain committed to delivering all strands of that agreement, and that's what I will work tirelessly to do.
Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, were there any discussions at the G20 about the situation in Iran? I've heard from a lot of constituents who want to express their solidarity with the protesters and their outrage at the way the regime is cracking down on them. So what steps can the G20 take to support progress towards stability and democracy in Iran?
Well, the protests send a clear message that the Iranian people are not satisfied with the path that their government has taken. As I was mentioning, we have now sanctioned 24 extra people, both political and security officials, for their role in the crackdown on protesters. And my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, recently summoned Iran's most senior diplomat in the UK to make clear that we do not tolerate threats to life and intimidation of any kind.
Sir Christopher Chu.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that Putin was emboldened to attack Ukraine by the continuous appeasement of Western democracies over many years? And why does he not think that a similar appeasement of the Chinese dictatorship will not result in a similar disaster?
So I'd just say to my honourable friend that our approach to China is in complete alignment with the United States, with Canada, on Australia. It is one that is absolutely clear-eyed about the challenges that China poses to our values and to our interests and to our economic security, and that's why it's right that we take robust action to defend ourselves against that, as we saw just yesterday with a decision on Chinese investment in a sensitive industry in this country.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the key global challenges facing the G20 is migration and refugees. And I know this country has a proud history of fulfilling our international obligations to the most vulnerable, including children. So could the Prime Minister just confirm that no unaccompanied asylum-seeking children under the age of 8 are currently being held at Manston? And if he doesn't know the answer, could he write to me as a matter of urgency? Thank you.
I'll be happy to write to the Right Honourable Lady. She'll know well that we have different processes and procedures in place for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children to make sure that they get extra safeguarding protection as they rightly are due, and I'll get back to her with an update on where we are.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Russian attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure in recent weeks just show the full extent of Putin's complete desperation. So can the Prime Minister confirm that the UK is providing Ukraine with the energy equipment and the support that they need to help repair their infrastructure so that they can keep their lights on and their heat coming in the months ahead?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this particular need of the Ukrainians. It's something that I've discussed a couple of times with President Zelensky, and I can assure him and the House that we are playing our part in providing funding and expertise to help resolve some of the issues, and the Ukrainians, I know, are very grateful for that support.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The G20 communiqué urged all parties to finalise and adopt the forthcoming COP15 Global Biodiversity Framework in Montreal. At this crisis time for nature, both globally and at home, he'll know the importance of leading by example. So as well as accelerating the UK's domestic environmental agenda, will he ensure that he's not forced into another last-minute U-turn, as we saw ahead of COP26? Will he commit now to attending COP15 in person and show that leadership?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think anyone can doubt our commitment to biodiversity and nature. It was something that the United Kingdom proudly led at Glasgow last year to put it on the agenda. We'll have a range of different people attending Montreal, but I was very pleased that we ensured that the G20 communiqué reaffirmed the G20's commitment to the targets that were set at COP. That was something that we fought very hard for, and we should all rightly be proud that it is there in the G20 communiqué.
Roman Chishti.
Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister a specific question with regards to the conversation he had with Prime Minister Trudeau? The United Kingdom and Canada have a specifically close relationship by being members of the G7, G20, Five Eyes, NATO and the Commonwealth. Whether it's friendships in Parliament or whether it's friendships with world leaders, one needs to know where they stand. Can I ask the Prime Minister, did he ask Prime Minister Trudeau with regards to Canada stepping up to its 2% GDP towards NATO? And did the United Kingdom ask Canada to do more in the high north, the Arctic, where we face greater threat from Russia and they have a specific expertise in that area?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I encourage all members of NATO to make their way towards the 2% target, something that we've proudly done in this country for some years. But also, our cooperation with Canada is deep. Prime Minister Trudeau was pleased to announce an extension of the Canadian support for our programme to train Ukrainian soldiers here, something that we're working closely with them on, and I'd be happy to pick up the conversation on the High North. Again, that will be a feature of our refreshed integrated review.
Geraint Davis.
The Prime Minister knows that the Energy Charter Treaty enables fossil fuel companies to sue governments who pass legislation that undermine their future profits in the name of climate change, and which is why Germany and France have announced they're withdrawing, as are Poland, Holland, Slovenia and Spain. So when does he anticipate the UK withdrawing from the Energy Charter Treaty, or does he put fossil fuel profits ahead of climate change? And will he raise this within WTO reform?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman mentioned a range of other countries in regard to fossil fuels. Actually, it was the United Kingdom who led through COP last year in making sure that we end the climate finance for coal plants, something that actually other countries do need to catch up with us on, and we will continue to champion that in all these forums because that's the right thing to do, and it was a commitment we made at Glasgow that needs to be upheld.
Richard Drax.
Madam Deputy Speaker, having just returned from Ukraine myself with the Defence Committee, along with my right honourable friend, can I tell the House how movingly grateful they are to all the support we give, and in particular to my right honourable friend for his outstanding leadership of this country fighting this Russian aggression. However, there are shortages of food, ammunition and military equipment. And while we in the United States are doing our bit, there is concern that other countries are not. Can my right honourable friend inform the House during the G19 or G20 meeting, did he have any feedback from other countries that they're going to step up to the plate like ourselves and the Americans are doing?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the need to continue supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. That remains a feature of all our conversations with allies. There's lots of different ways people can play their part. For example, as I mentioned, the Canadians recently extending their support for training Ukrainians here. But he's right that we need to keep up the pressure. The UK has shown great leadership on this alongside America, and we will jointly encourage others to follow our lead and make sure that Ukraine can be in the strongest possible position for bringing an end to this awful conflict.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that private citizens in the UK should follow the example of several British businesses and sell any shares that they have in businesses that still operate in Russia?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the United Kingdom took the lead in imposing some of the most stringent sanctions, economic sanctions, on both the Russian economy, Russian businesses, and indeed Russian individuals. It's pleasing that other countries have followed, and we will continue to push other countries to follow our lead with sanctions, and we will continue to tighten them where we think it can make a difference.
Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his update on trade talks? Can I ask him whether in those talks there was any discussion about extending the arrangements to include our number one industry, finance and professional services, in those arrangements?
Actually, my honourable friend knows this area well, and that's why it's important that we take the time with trade deals, because often services liberalisation, which he rightly knows is very important for our economy, does take longer to negotiate than simple tariff reductions on goods. Our economy has an incredible services sector. It's important that they benefit from trade deals going forward, and that's what I want to make sure happens.
Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When the Prime Minister met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman earlier this week, did he challenge him on the way in which Saudi Arabia has been blocking the proposal at COP27 for the phase down of all fossil fuels?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we had a wide-ranging conversation on a range of topics, including climate change. We are very much committed to our obligations under the COP agreement, and we very much welcome Saudi Arabia's commitment to be net zero by 2060. There's lots of different opportunities for them to play their part as COP presidents coming up, and we will look forward to supporting them in that endeavour.
Ruth Edwards.
The last few years have shown us the importance of resilient supply chains. Can my right honourable friend confirm that a priority for his discussions with allies at the G20 was decoupling our supply chains from authoritarian regimes in key areas such as critical minerals and products like semiconductors?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I'm pleased to tell her that just yesterday the Business Secretary made a decision with regard to semiconductors which should give her and others confidence that we take this incredibly seriously. I discussed critical minerals with many of our allies around the world, and I'm pleased to say that Japan, with their G7 presidency next year, will put economic security at the heart of our collective agenda.
Kevin Brennan.
Deputy Speaker, on Northern Ireland, it's reported today in the Times that the Prime Minister promised President Biden that the issues surrounding the Northern Ireland Protocol would be solved by next April. Was that the commitment that he gave to President Biden? And with a long, hard winter facing the people of Northern Ireland without a government there in place, shouldn't there be a greater sense of urgency from the UK government to sort this out?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said actually publicly and clearly, I want to see a resolution to this issue as soon as possible. It's why I spoke to my counterparts in Ireland, the European Commission and others almost the first day I took office, and I'm working very hard to try and bring about a negotiated settlement to the challenges we face. But those challenges on the ground are real. Businesses, families, communities are suffering as a result of the protocol. I've made that point loudly and clearly to all our counterparts, and I've urged them to show flexibility and pragmatism in their response so we can get the situation resolved on the ground and get the executive back up and running, because that's what the people of Northern Ireland deserve.
Richard Graham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I congratulate G20 and its chair on their final communiqué with unanimous condemnation of the continued invasion of Ukraine, and the Prime Minister and other Western leaders on their work to de-escalate tensions between the West and China. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that apart from the important work that he is doing multilaterally in the TPP and bilaterally with India on the FTA, there are also other bilateral opportunities with leading Asian countries? And will he encourage their heads of government to do working visits to the UK?
Yes. I absolutely will do that, and can I also congratulate my honourable friend on his reappointment as a trade envoy to Indonesia. It's a region he knows particularly well, and he's done fantastic work in deepening our bilateral relationship with a country that is going to play an increasingly important role in the global economy, as one of the third largest democracy in the world, one of the largest Muslim countries in the world, and will soon to be a top 5 economy. It's right that we have deep relationships with Indonesia, and I thank him for his part in making sure that that is happening.
Flora Anderson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, water and sanitation is a major global crisis causing conflict, migration, equality for women and girls, and health outcomes which are easily preventable. Can the Prime Minister confirm whether he had conversations about the water and sanitation crisis with other G20 members, and will he reverse the 80% FCDO cuts to water and sanitation projects?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the conversations I had with other leaders were incredibly appreciative of the role that the United Kingdom is playing in helping to tackle suffering, poverty and poor sanitation around the world. Particularly what was highlighted was our recent commitment of £1 billion to the Global Fund, as well as our track record in supporting countries to alleviate famine. Those are things that everyone in this House should be proud of, and this government will continue to champion.
Laura Farris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The whole House will welcome the shared commitment to the defence of Ukraine and the rule of law. But my right honourable friend will know that key to that last element is the work of the International Criminal Court, which launched its investigation into war crimes in March, with an aspiration to issue an indictment by the end of the year. Can he confirm that the UK will continue to do all it can to support their work, including the difficult task that lies ahead of obtaining custody of Russian military generals to stand trial?
Well, obviously this is an area my honourable friend knows well, and she's right to highlight it. I'm pleased to tell her the United Kingdom was out in front in providing both technical and financial resources to the efforts to gather the evidence, and I know the Justice Secretary is in touch with the British prosecutor as well, and the team will have our full support.
Alison Tulis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, when the Prime Minister met with Prime Minister Modi, did he raise the case of Jagtar Singh Johal, who today has been held in arbitrary detention for 1,840 days? The Sikh community in Scotland are incredibly concerned about this situation. So was it just handshakes and Instagram photographs, or did he raise this case?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've consistently raised our concerns about Mr Jahal's case directly with all levels of the Indian government. I discussed more generally the issues around extradition with Prime Minister Modi, and the Foreign Secretary raised this case with India's Minister of External Affairs just last month on his visit to India.
Mr Mayhew.
Mr made reference to the dangers of debt traps for emerging economies. Can he give further information on what steps the United Kingdom has taken to provide emerging economies with alternatives to Chinese money?
Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight the need for sensible alternatives. We tend to work not just bilaterally but also multilaterally through things like SDR recycling at the IMF. The new Resilience and Sustainability Trust that was established was done so with UK leadership, and indeed the new Debt Service Suspension Initiative is something that I championed as Chancellor, and we need to make sure that we deliver on it.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister laid out his approach to trade deals in his statement. He will be aware that while he was there, the Right Honourable Member for Camborne and Redruth was describing the trade deal with Australia as not a very good deal for the United Kingdom. Does the Prime Minister agree with the Right Honourable Member, who was formerly the Environment Secretary? And if so, what's he going to do about it?
Before the Prime Minister attempts to answer the question, there's far too much noise in the chamber. I mean, you would think that people were anticipating something happening and chatting amongst themselves instead of giving their full attention to the important answers the Prime Minister is giving to important questions. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Maybe not as important as what's about to come from the Chancellor. But all trade deals involve give and take on both sides. The Australia trade deal will open up new markets for 3 million British jobs, which is fantastic, reduce prices for Australian goods and make it easier for young people to move back and forth between those two countries. And going forward, we will ensure that our trade deals work for the UK. That's what we'll deliver.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister has reaffirmed the government's strong commitment to supporting Ukraine in the face of Russia's illegal and inhumane invasion and underlined the leadership that we provided to other countries. Can he confirm that our superb armed forces will continue to provide the appropriate support, especially in training Ukraine's brave defenders to ensure that evil cannot triumph, that Putin fails, and did he encourage other G20 members to do likewise?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and it's an issue that he's rightly championed on previous occasions. I can give him that reassurance. The NATO Secretary General was just in the United Kingdom days ago visiting the training that we're providing for Ukrainian soldiers. It's something that is looked at favourably by many allies around the world, which is why Prime Minister Trudeau was pleased to confirm when he was with me an extension to Canadian support for that programme, and hopefully many more countries will follow.
Tony Lloyd.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not so many months ago that any international conference like the G20 would have been seized with the situation in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has now gone off the agenda, but the humanitarian crisis there is one that is moving into absolute tragedy as people are facing starvation. Can the Prime Minister tell us what conversations did take place about Afghanistan, or in any case, will he now reconvene the kind of donor conference that could make a material difference to starvation in that country?
My honourable friend is right to highlight that Afghanistan continues to experience one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. That's why earlier this year we co-hosted a UN pledging summit together with Germany and Qatar that helped raise over $2 billion for Afghanistan. But he's right to put it on the agenda, and I'll make sure that we continue to do what we can to support the people there.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A free trade deal with India is a tremendous opportunity for both the United Kingdom and India. And I agree with my right honourable friend, we should not sacrifice quality at the expense of doing a deal quickly. However, during his discussions with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, what obstacles do you actually clear so that we can actually get on with the free trade deal that we all want to see?
Well, I know my honourable friend has rightly been a significant champion of this deal and our relationships with India. I'm pleased to have his support. Now, without negotiating for all these things in public, I'm pleased that the majority of the substantive negotiation conversations were concluded by the end of October. We will now work at pace with the Indian teams to try and resolve the issues and come to a mutually satisfactory conclusion.
We're a house.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker. Our closest trading partners are still in the EU. Can you update us what you did during the G20 summit to improve relationship with EU countries, which, to say the least, are still fragile since Brexit?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, we may have left the EU, but we have not left Europe, and it's important that we maintain strong and positive relationships with our European partners and allies. That's very much what I intend to do, and I'm pleased that those conversations have been going well.
Tom Byrne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad that the situation regarding refugees all over the world was discussed, but no debate on refugees can be complete without a discussion about the plight of the Rohingya. Could my right honourable friend confirm to me that world leaders considered and had a discussion about further support we can provide to Rohingya refugees, who are the largest refugee camp in the world, and one of great concern for my constituents.
Well, I know this is an issue of concern for my honourable friend, and it's right that he raises it and champions the case. I'm pleased to tell him that we have sanctioned those people responsible, and we will continue to make sure that we can provide whatever support we can to the people who need our help.
John Trickett.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. In the communique from the G20, the words food supply, or food scarcity are mentioned 54 separate times. And it's good that Britain's taking part of a global community's fight to make sure that food is properly distributed. But last year, before the Ukraine war, 1 in 9 Britons were driven to use a food bank. Isn't it clear it wasn't disruption of food which was the problem, it was poverty. Poverty driven by number 10 and number 11 when he was in the Treasury. And isn't it clear that for the poor of Britain, this is a nightmare, that hunger is a nightmare created by Downing Street?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor is about to deliver a statement that's going to ensure that our economy is strong, that we support the most vulnerable, and we have a clear platform for growth. I'd urge the honourable gentleman to wait for it.
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Peace on the continent must be restored. It's a fact that no one in Europe is truly safe until Putin fails. Can my right honourable friend update the House on how we will make this happen alongside our global allies in the G20?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what's important is that Russia understands that the global community speaks with one voice in condemning its illegal and barbaric actions. I'm pleased that the G20 communique expresses that sentiment, as many more countries are joining our efforts to stand up to Russian aggression and support Ukraine.
Margaret Farray.
Mr. Speaker, during talks on the CPTPP, did the Prime Minister convey the concerns of the UK's fantastic food and farming industries? And what assurances was he able to obtain that these industries will be considered and protected as negotiations continue?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I stand by our commitment not to compromise the United Kingdom's high environmental, animal welfare and food safety standards, and will ensure that our trade deals open up new markets for British farmers.
Luke Evans.
The cost of living in the UK is going up mainly because of the war that Russia is purporting, but it's not just affecting us, it's affecting the EU zone, which has inflation as an average of 10%. So what discussions did the Prime Minister have about a strategy at the G20 to deal with inflation, which is clearly a worldwide problem?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the global nature of these challenges that we are facing, in part caused by Russia's aggression. The G20 communique is clear on responsibility of individual countries to ensure financial stability, and as it says, that means delivering long-term fiscal sustainability, and that's what this Chancellor will deliver.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister very much for his statement and for his strong stance on behalf of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We thank you for that. The actions of Putin and his regime have driven 2/3 of the G20 countries into economic distress, raised inflation for us in this country by 10 to 11%, and talk of a recession are prevalent for many countries. Russia is the enemy within in the G20. What is the Prime Minister doing to align with all other G20 countries to ostracise Russia and to reduce their influence and indeed, if possible, their very membership of the G20?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is not possible in a consensual organisation to expel Russia, but I'm pleased to say to the honourable gentleman that we work closely with all partners across the G20 to deliver a strong, unified message that the threat and use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible, and today's era must not be the era for war. I think Russia heard that message loud and clear.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share my right honourable friend's view that China presents a systemic challenge to the West. We've just seen in Russia how an authoritarian action can use their role in our supply chains to do damage to the global economy. So can my right honourable friend confirm that when we do engage with China on global issues like climate change or public health, he'll never do so at the expense of our national or economic security?
I can absolutely give my honourable friend that assurance. We will always be robust in defending our values and our interests, and that starts with our national security.
John Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. The government's mishandling of the Northern Ireland Protocol negotiations is acting as a barrier to trade deals and to scientific collaboration. The Prime Minister says he was much influenced by his time at Stanford. Surely he understands the key role of science and scientific research in driving economic growth, something we sorely need at the moment. Is he really going to exclude British scientists from the world's biggest scientific research programme, Horizon?
Prime Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, no one can doubt my commitment personally to ensuring that the UK remains, as it is, a scientific and technological superpower. That's why we've increased the R&D budget. That's why we're deregulating to support innovation. That's why we're reforming our capital markets to get money to all the companies who need it. We'll hear more from the Chancellor about that, but I can give the Honourable Lady every assurance. Innovation is the way we drive growth, and that's what the government will deliver.
That completes the statement on the G20. Before we come to the statement by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I'd like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of the statement and opposition front benches' responses will be available to watch on Parliament Live TV. I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement. Jeremy Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, in the face of unprecedented global headwinds, families, pensioners, businesses, teachers, nurses and many others are worried about the future. So today we deliver a plan to tackle the cost of living crisis and rebuild our economy.